Are you struggling to nail down who you are as a knitting pattern designer? If you are, don't worry, you're not alone. And in this video, I'm going to help you to discover and embrace who you are as a knitting pattern designer, find that signature style that helps you to stand out and find joy and fulfillment in the knitting pattern design process. So in case we haven't met before, hi, I'm Claire. I am a knitting pattern designer and teacher. I have loved knitting since I was a kid. I went to university to study fashion knitwear design, and now I design my own knitting patterns and I teach knitters like you how to do the same. So you might be wondering, why is it so important to find your signature style? Well, if you talk to kind of typical marketing people, they will tell you that it's good to have a brand style. You know, it kind of keeps your work cohesive. People can instantly recognize your work. And, you know, it kind of builds a dedicated fan base who just really love your particular style. And, you know, thinking about the big designers in our industry, that's true. Like, you can kind of think about, okay, well, Andrea Mowry, Petite Knit, Laura Penrose, these big designers, they do have a certain aesthetic that you can kind of pick out and you can identify as something by them. So yeah, that is certainly a big plus point for sure. But the perspective that I have is that most importantly, designing in your own signature style is it's good for you. It's good for you. As a designer, especially as a new designer, it is really easy to fall into the trap of designing like the big designers, feeling like, okay, well, this is popular and I want my patterns to be popular and therefore I'm going to design in the style of this designer. And if it just so happens that your signature style kind of matches with theirs, then sure, that process can feel really satisfying. But if you are trying to push yourself to be someone that you're not as a designer, it can feel really disappointing. The reason I say this is because as a new designer, you probably won't have a big fan base. And therefore, in the beginning especially, you're not going to be selling a ton of patterns. And so if you pair the fact that you're maybe not making as many sales as you want with the fact that you are designing things that don't feel true to who you are, it's a little bit, what's the word? I want to say soul destroying, but that's maybe a bit extreme, but it just feels demoralizing. That's what I was looking for. And so what I like to do and what I've been working towards for a very long time is figuring out who I am, what brings me joy, what do I love to knit, what do I love to wear, what inspires me and makes me excited, and, you know, what do I look forward to working on? And in doing that, it means that part of the joy of designing knitting patterns is not in the reception that those knitting patterns get, because you can't control that, right? That's something that is out of your control. Sure, you can influence it through your marketing and exposure, getting it out there, but the truth is you can do the things that you do, but whether people buy it or not is really up to them. So if you want to feel joy and satisfaction and fulfillment in the patterns that you're creating, then a big part of that is leaning into what you love, and it may be kind of different to what other people love, but if you lean into that, then the joy and the fulfillment can come from the process and not necessarily the reception. And for designers who are just starting out, that's what makes it sustainable. That's what makes you keep on going back for more, because like I said, there's not going to be much monetary gain, if any, in the beginning, just being honest. And in terms of feedback from kind of customers, you may not have that many customers. So if you are relying upon them to bring you joy, the kind of results of the pattern to bring you joy, then I feel like you're going to give up quite quickly. But if you are finding joy in the process of designing, then that's where that kind of sustainability comes in. You're willing to kind of stick it out until you build your fan base. And yeah, it's just a beautiful thing to be able to lean into your own unique interests, your own unique design aesthetic, turn it from this idea into this real life thing. It just feels amazing. For me, my signature style has gone through many iterations over the years. I grew up knitting Rowan magazine patterns, so I really had a lot of influence come from the designers in those magazines. You know, Sarah Hatton, Kim Hargreaves, Marie Wallen, who incidentally ended up becoming one of my tutors at university, which was very cool. And yeah, that kind of influenced my own style. So I suppose it had more of a maybe traditional, slightly more heritage vibe to my style as a knitting pattern designer, or at least not a knitting pattern designer, but just the things I was designing for myself. And then when I got to uni, I immediately had this pressure of having gone from being like the only knitter that I knew of in my peers to being one of many and feeling like I needed to stand out. And so I ended up trying to stand out amongst those other knitwear designers on my course. And so I felt like I had to make my work much more avant-garde, much more statement, and yeah, just kind of explore silhouettes and techniques that maybe I, didn't do previously. And I think it was great, like it was amazing. And the work that I produced was fabulous. It was technically great. It was very creative. But what I will say is that producing it was just so hard. But more than anything, I think I look back at that collection and it doesn't feel like me. And that's okay. Like, I'm okay with that. But I think I would have found the process a lot more fulfilling if I had leaned into more of what I love and who I am, as opposed to feeling the pressure to be someone maybe that I'm not. And so after that, I've really spent a long time kind of exploring who I am as a designer, and there are patterns in my back catalogue that feel very me. And likewise, there are patterns that I'm like, I literally don't recognise myself in that. I don't see any of myself in that. And it's really been a process of exploration and just kind of nailing down what is it about this design that feels so me. And I think now in reflection, I think I'm coming to a place where I kind of know who I am as a designer finally, after many years. And I think what I have discovered is that for me, my designs have a lot of ease, a lot of comfort, and they have special details. Special details have always been my thing. When I was working in the commercial knitwear industry, I loved infusing just quirky little details into designs, turning kind of more functional elements of a garment into a design detail. That's just makes me so excited. It kind of reminds me of like, if you get a coat and then the inside lining is kind of unexpected, and it gives you that thrill because you know that from the outside no one would know, and it's like this little thing for you. That's kind of how I feel about special details in design. It brings me a lot of joy infusing those. And yeah, I think recently I've been leaning into a slightly more playful aesthetic with my work. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that tracks going forward. So if I have managed to convince you that finding your kind of signature style is worthwhile, how do you go about it? Because if you're anything like me, you kind of feel like you've spent so long trying to replicate what other successful people are doing, that sometimes it's really hard to know what you like. And if you're in this situation, don't beat yourself up for it. I think many of us do that in order to kind of find our way into the industry. But now is the time to do some soul searching. And the first thing I would recommend is to make a giant mood board. A good place to do it is Pinterest, but of course, if you are more of an analog person, go through your coffee table books, go through your magazines, make photocopies, print things out, put things on like big boards. You don't even have to put it on a board, you can literally just collect imagery. But the key here is to gather a very, very large amount of imagery. And what that will do is give you this kind of big pool of things that you know interest you. And, you know, I suppose when it comes to things like, I don't know, working with like popular magazines, maybe recent magazines, and certainly with Pinterest as well, the algorithm or like the latest trends will influence your own aesthetic preferences, probably. The kind of imagery that you have access to will be influenced by that. But I want to encourage you to seek out other forms of inspiration as well. So, for example, with Pinterest, don't just search through the kind of, what would you call it? Like it's not the For You page, but the kind of pre-curated images that just pop up when you go on Pinterest. If you know that you like a certain thing, search for it on Pinterest and find imagery related to that, and maybe that will send you down a rabbit hole through other things that you're really interested in. And the things that you're interested in don't even have to be like visual fashion stuff or even textile stuff. It can really be anything in the world of visual culture. Anything can have can be like a source of visual inspiration, even if the source itself is not overly visual. So yeah, just truly lean into what makes you tick, even the weird stuff, you know, like maybe you're into some niche films or bands that nobody likes listening to, but you really do. This is me. Yeah, I think just sort of lean into your quirks, because that's what makes you you, and that's what will set your designs apart. And once you've done that, the next step is to kind of look for common themes, because what you will find is when you kind of curate this giant mood board or a giant kind of collection of images, there will be common threads between them. It's just naturally going to happen. And the threads may take you by surprise. And that's why it's really good to have this quite sort of indiscriminatory process for like gathering your images. Really just like grab anything that interests you, don't think too hard about it. And then when you're looking for those threads, it's just like a natural progression of the process. And yeah, find those common threads. And my suspicion is that they will tell you a lot about your own design taste, and who you want to be as a designer, who you are inside. If you are a designer who already has some kind of designs under your belt as well, it can be really helpful to look at your past designs and think about what are the ones that I really loved working on, what are the ones that I was glad to see the back of. And interestingly, those ones may be one of your more popular patterns, but just kind of note them down, just kind of keep it in mind. And you know, which are the ones that maybe you find yourself wearing a lot. That can tell you a lot about your personal style as a designer. It can be really interesting because the things that you often wear can be quite different to the things that you love designing. And it's really up to you which one you want to lean into. There is no right answer here, but it's just interesting to note that. And like I said just a moment ago, think about your personal interests. Like, what are you into at the minute? Are there ways to kind of infuse those interests into your design work at the minute? It could be that you're really enjoying hiking at the moment, and therefore maybe there are aspects of the landscape around you that you want to kind of infuse into your work. Or it might be that you're really loving a certain band at the moment, and maybe you want to influence elements of that kind of band subculture into your design work. Really, there is there's no limit here. It's just interesting to explore that. And just to kind of elaborate on that, like a lot of the early process of figuring out who you are as a designer is very much about experimentation. It's very much about following those whims of like, oh, I really like this. Like, can I do more of this? Like, how do I infuse it into further patterns? Just kind of allowing your curiosity to lead you. And then eventually you will find yourself in a position where you have an amount of a certain confidence with who you are as a designer, and confidence as to what you want your work to look like. And I think the amount of time that it takes to reach there will vary. It will vary, and it really depends on how much time you can dedicate to designing as well. I think sometimes designers who are able to work on their stuff all the time, like full time, they reach their personal style much quicker than those of us who are kind of doing it in gaps of our day, and kind of trying to squeeze it in as and when, and not able to make tons of progress. That can take a little bit longer, but don't be discouraged. It's still something worth exploring. And when it comes to trends, I do encourage you to play around with them. I think they can be a really fun, exciting part of the design process, and the experimentation that maybe comes and leads you towards finding your signature style. But I would say that no matter where you are in the process, try to filter it through your own design taste. So I frequently am looking at trends. I'm always looking to see what's popular on Ravelry, what's kind of popular in general, in terms of the fashion world and just general visual culture. But I have to interpret it through my own kind of design aesthetic, because otherwise my work isn't going to be cohesive, and I'm going to feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. It's just going to feel very scattered. So if you want to play around with trends, I encourage it, but try to kind of filter it through your own unique taste. And when it comes to feedback, feedback is amazing. Like I love feedback when it comes to things like, from test knitters, feedback on the pattern, feedback on the fit, just feedback in general from knitters who want to improve the kind of usability of my patterns, the kind of more technical side of things. When it comes to aesthetics, I feel like it's so objective that I try not to let other people's opinions, and normally it's only it's not going to be a ton of people anyway. When it comes to aesthetics, I try not to let it influence me too much, because what some people love, some people are not going to enjoy, and what some people don't enjoy, some people are going to love. So it's so personal, it's so objective. I try to listen to my heart when it comes to the visuals of my designs, and then listen to customer feedback, test knitter feedback when it comes to the more like usability, technical side of things. Fit obviously is super important, but yeah, listen to my heart with the visuals. Finding your signature style is key to coming up with designs that you love and that your customers will love. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on signature style. Do you have one? If so, do you want to kind of share with the class what you would consider to be your own signature style? And if you don't have it, maybe what steps are you going to take to try and discover it? Have you found any kind of common threads that you want to explore? Share that in the comments too, because I think that would be really interesting. If you are interested in pursuing knitting pattern design further, kind of expanding your technical skills, I do teach a course called Sweater Design School, where I take knitters through the whole design process. So from coming up with the idea all the way through to publishing their patterns. So literally everything in between. And yes, I do cover grading, because that is a common question. And yes, grading is one of the most thorough sections of the course. It's very comprehensive. But if you want to learn a little bit more about what I teach in Sweater Design School, get a bit of a taster for what to expect, then there is a free video you can watch, and I'll link to it beneath this video. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, maybe subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have any knitting friends who are interested in design, then I would really appreciate it if you would share it with them as well. It's been my pleasure to talk with you today, and I look forward to talking more knitting pattern design stuff next